Hi, I'm Caedyn Stinson from the Max Planck School of Cognition. I'd like to start my presentation off today. There we go. I'd like to start my presentation today by asking everyone who's watching at home or at the office and everyone who's here, I want you to think about how much you earn every month. So think about what your income is. This is the after-tax income that gets deposited in your bank account every single month. Now, I want you to line up every person in Germany from lowest income all the way up to the highest income, and I want you to think of which percentile do you think you would fall, with 100% being the lowest percentile and 0% being the top. So I want you to think about that for a second. Where do you think your monthly income would rank? So according to the German Economics Institute, this gives you somewhat of an idea about where your income would place you amongst the people in Germany. Now, it's been told to me that it's extremely rude to ask a German person how much they earn, and so relax, I'm not going to ask anyone their income. Instead, I looked it up beforehand, and I'll present it to you now. So to start with, we have all of our new students who have just joined us, the first years who will be on their pre-doc stipend. Your salary will put you just at the top end of the bottom third of people in Germany as far as your income goes. Then, to give you some inspiration to really make sure you see it that first year and get into the full PhD program, once we get to 100% stipend, we're fortunate enough to be almost 3/4 of the way through the population, with only 26% of people earning more money than us per month. After this, of course, any postdocs watching, there's quite some variation with the how much you'll earn, but generally you'll be earning, on average, slightly more than the PhD students. And then once we get into the professorships, this is where it really jumps up. And we have most of the professors watching will be in the top 10%, with the W2 and the W3 professors fortunate enough to be earning in the top 5 percentile of the population. And just in case any of the Bundestag members were kind enough to join us today, I didn't want you to feel left out, so we've included your salary in there as well. Fortunate enough to be in the in the 2nd percentile of salary earning. So why have I brought this up today? I mean, first of all, I think it's important for our new students who have joined the program to understand what expectations they should have for the catering for their Christmas parties this Christmas time. But more importantly, I think this is a really good example about showing people how our social circles and the people around us can influence the way we perceive the world. So I'm not sure, how most people went, but according to most studies, it's pretty likely that you thought that you were much closer to the average than you actually were. Now, why does this happen? Well, taking, for example, someone who's earning the top percentiles of the population, if you earn more, so say you're a professor in our program, then the people that would come quickly to mind when making a comparison between incomes would probably, first of all, be your colleagues from work. Second of all, you might also be thinking about the opportunities that you gave up in the private sector to stay in academia. And then, of course, I asked you to compare yourself compared to the entire population. So you probably source from memory some salaries that you could think for people who are in other departments. But of course, if you're earning more, then generally you'll be able to spend more money in the places you go. And so again, this might be skewed in favor. So the people who are surrounding you give this artificial sense of where you actually are, which means that you shift yourself much more towards the average in your perception of how much you earn, as opposed to what you really do. And this works in the other way as well. So for our new students who are just joining, you're probably very aware of the people at your institute and how much they earned, but you're also probably much more cognizant about how many people are doing free internships, for example, or who are working for minimum HEVI wages. So then you're also probably understanding that, the silver lining of this program, what's waiting for you ahead of you. But then you also would have contextualized this within the population. And again, the places that you go probably are slightly lower, and your friends who have different jobs are probably earlier in their career than the professors in our program. And so again, this biases you into thinking that you're probably much closer to the average than you truly are. Now, I know the way I've been framing this makes it seem like I'm talking about a cognitive bias or something that's hazardous to us, or that it's getting in the way of our perception of the world. But I really don't want to make this impression. For most things that we interact with the world with, the distribution across the population is really quite constant. And this means that it's an efficient way for us to interact with the world and produce expectations or perceptions of it by just taking sampling from the immediate environment around us. By doing this quick sampling of just our local environment, we get a pretty good estimate about the true state of the whole world. And no matter where we are in this environment, with these situations, we'll come up with the same expectations and the same predictions. It's only in instances like the income example that I gave you, where the population is skewed across the population, and you have different expectations in different clusters that we see this. And this is really irrelevant in fields such as politics or conspiracy theories, where we see that people, because of the people who are surrounding them being much more similar to themselves, they don't get a good, accurate representation about what the true state of the full world is. So for my PhD, I'm really interested in looking further at the mechanisms that rely behind this. I'm particularly interested in looking at how our surroundings implant themselves in our memory and our experience, and how we then use these experiences to create perceptions, opinions, or just in general have a feel about what the true state of the world is. For my PhD, I have two primary aims. So the first aim is I want to kind of build upon the work that's already done before me on this work with how our social circles and our social environment influences our perceptions. So building on this, we already have studies which have shown that people are influenced by the people who surround them in this economic example I've already given you, but we also see it in healthcare with people's perception of the risk of different diseases, in travel with people's perception of how many people travel to different destinations or the popularity of them, and also in the relative participatory rates of different sports. So just to give you an idea about how my field goes about this, typically we'll ask an example such as which is the most popular holiday destination, France or Spain? And then we'll ask a person to go through their social network and tell us which of their members that they know or who they know from their social network has visited either destination. We then use this with a computational model, which shows, we predict that people will siphon through their different circles of their social network until they reach a level of the circle where they can actually make a decision about which of these levels, or which of these destinations is the more popular. So by going through this and only limitedly sampling those people closest to us, we don't have to consult the extended world beyond that. And just based on a small sample size, we can make a pretty good indication about the true state of the world. So for my study, I want to take these already existing models and expand them beyond these kind of arbitrary, not arbitrary, but more limiting categories of such as friends, families, and acquaintances. So with these models, by restricting that, we miss out on some really interesting information, such as that different people have different social networks, which may have different interactions within the individuals in it. But not only will this give us a better model and a more accurate model of how our memories work, but it will also allow us to go beyond the domain of just looking at people and people in the social network, and we'll be able to incorporate things such as news sites and social media sites and see how this influences people's perceptions. So that's one part of my study, is looking at how people kind of originally form these opinions, how the things that they experience and the things they can draw from memory influences their perception of the world. But the second aspect I'm interested in looking at is what happens when we're repeatedly asked to have opinions or repeatedly asked the same question. So let's take the question that I asked you at the beginning, where I asked you to consider where you think your salary ranks in the world. Now assume that the next speaker following after me was Oprah, and she was announcing that every single student in the program was being awarded 1,000 euros tax-free on their monthly wage. Now, if I was to ask the same question and ask you where do you think your salary lies in the population, I would be really surprised if you went back and tried to think of individual exemplars from memory to then form a kind of ranking based on your immediate social environment. Because I've already told you about where you've ranked, it would make more sense to take this more abstract representation and then use that to adjust it and to create your new perception of the world based on that. And so with my PhD, I'm really hoping that we can combine both this environmental factor, so how our environment influences our initial forming of an opinion, and then secondarily, what happens when we're repeatedly expressing opinions or repeatedly exposed to some bit of information. Do we continue to consider individual cases, or do we start to form a more abstract representation of people and a more kind of emotional-based opinion rather than something that's more based on individual sampling from the population? And it's my hope that we'll be able to use this model to not just look at psychological experiments, but maybe use it in the real world to look at people such as when people are subject to misinformation. By understanding the process better, it's my goal, it's my aim that we'll be able to better understand the process, to have better interventions to protect people, help people protect themselves from misinformation, and also potentially to advise policy, which can do things such as regulating social media or news, newspapers or news media outlets. Thank you very much.